We got into the 22nd verse of the ninth chapter. You remember Paul has been going through and explaining his preaching and what he gloried in, the fact that he made the gospel free to everyone. Uh, he had an obligation to fulfill. He said, I'm indebted to all men. And of course, the indebtedness came to him because of the mercy and grace that God has shown him. And it was almost like Paul wanted to repay, if he could, all the damage that he had done to the church. I mean, he never lost sight of that. And beginning here in verse 22, he's talking about how he related to other people. He said, "I to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." I'd like to read that to you from the Amplified. It says, "To the weak, wanting in discernment, I have become weak, wanting in discernment, that I might win the weak and the overscrupulous. I have, in short, become all things to all men, that I might by all means, at all costs, and in any way and every way, save some by winning them to the faith in Jesus Christ." That really went into a detailed explanation. But the thing I liked about it, it explains the week that he's talking about. And the conversation that we've had through the book of Corinthians, when he's talking about the week, what has he been describing, or who is he describing?
He's describing those that are kind of holding on to tenets of the old law, and not that they're in violation of the law of Christ, but it was things they were used to, things that they felt important to them.
Okay.
He's comparing those that know better
Two
to those that know
right. Two different groups: the Jews who were finding it hard to open up and think that now there were no restrictions concerning clean and unclean animals, but also to the Gentiles who had and been involved in idolatry. They had a problem with meats that were sold in the marketplace that had been offered idols, and they had a sensitive conscience toward that. This says over scrupulous. These issues were not a matter of absolute right and wrong. They were a matter of an act that uh, became a matter of conscience. They were had a tender conscience, and so the strong were the ones who said, "There's nothing in an idol." It was the Jew that said, "Yes, the law's gone. I don't have to observe that. I can eat pork if I want to." But not all of them were that way, and so that was the weak and the poor. And so he's saying to those people that are weak, I gave in to them and certainly would not do anything to violate their conscience. And my recommendation is to you not to do that either. And so that's what he had. And of course, the aim is that he could save some by the gospel. And he says, "This I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you." Then he begins in 24 talking about how we are to uh, occupy ourselves in living the Christian life. And he is going to refer to something they're very familiar with, and that's the races and the athletic competition that was had there in Corinth. And that was the Isthmian Games that was held every 2 years, and all of them are familiar with that. It brought people from all over the Hellenistic world. It was a kind of a uniting feature for all those people that shared that common background, and they were quite familiar with what was involved with the participants in that type of game. He's It was kind of like a competitor, the Olympics in the city of Athens and the Isthmian Games in Corinth. It took place actually on the seacoast 9 miles from the city of Corinth. Uh, but it required a great deal of training and very, very strong discipline. They had certain diet that they could eat. They were under a trainer for 30 days before they could participate. No, pardon me. It was 10 months training, and then the last 30 days they were all there and they had daily exercises in the gymnasium that was there in the city of Corinth. And so very, very strenuous. And so that's what he's talking about. He says, "Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that ye may obtain." In that particular race that they were, one man was going to receive the laurel, the wreath that would be placed on his head for participating. And in the Christian race, it's not a single person that can win the race. The crown of life is for available for all those who are faithful to Christ. They're obedient and they're faithful to the end. But he's wanting them to see the discipline that goes in. That's what he's focusing on, and that's how he says we need to run the Christian race. He says, "And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate." Temperate here means self-control. He's under self-control in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. So here he's making the difference between the physical side of life and what goes into that mastery and this sort of thing. But for the one who's going to be successful in the Christian life is going to require the same kind of self-control to discipline oneself uh, in every way, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And so that's what he's trying to get them to see. He says, "I therefore so run, not as uncertain. So fight I, not as one that beateth the air." What do you call that when you're just beating the air? Shadow boxing. Have you heard that term? And so he's saying, I'm running this race with intention. I know exactly what's involved, and every day there is this about me that I'm going to control myself, and I'm going to run this race. I'm not just beating the air. There's purpose in what I'm doing. I'm fighting the spiritual warfare. And then in verse 27, and this is a I think a key verse for all of us to think about. He says, "But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." That's a pretty profound statement, isn't it? If the Apostle Paul did not feel like he was guaranteed salvation, or any of us in any positions have that attitude of once saved, always saved. And yet that's what a large part of the religious world wants to hold to. Yes, sir.
It's not just training. It's not just running. It's not just shadow boxing. And it's not that I'm working all my life to come in second place because those are your castaways of those games. One guy's name is remembered, everybody else is gone.
Right.
So he's saying this ain't just training. This is the life.
Right. Right.
It's not just temporary training, and then when the games are over, you go back to being a whoever you were.
Right. This continues throughout your life. Right. The Christian race is not something that you accomplish and then lay it aside, but it is a lifelong endeavor. And certainly he wants us to see that.
Right. It's Paul that still held the mentality that he had of being saved. Is we better gear up on some things.
Right.
We are too. How should I put it? Maybe we're too confident sometimes when we're not living
You know,
and other things.
I think of a statement that the Apostle Peter made in his epistles, and that is, if the righteous scarcely be saved, where will the ungodly stand in judgment? And so, you know, when you think about it, think of the great cost that anyone's salvation is achieved. It took the death of Jesus Christ for us to even have a hope of eternal salvation. And so, um, to live a life that is not disciplined, that is not focused, like he's talking about, is to be blasé toward the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross, isn't it? It's like it's not really that important, for me to really change my life and to do something in response. And that's what Paul is trying to get them to see.
Continual blessings aren't just or things go some way that we don't think, well, why would God let this happen to me, or why should this happen to me because I'm trying to be right?
Right.
It's how many of those athletes would have been in prime shape after 10 months, and then when they didn't win, they were like, well, who cares?
It was all for nothing, yeah.
See, we won't work and diligently try to be Christ-like until, and then you can put whatever marker in your life you want
Right.
to, that happens to us, and then we give up,
Right.
walk away.
Right. It describes the life of one of not being easy. It's going to take a lot of effort, and like you say, there are going to be hardships, and you have to persevere through those. Yes.
And then this, I think of an advertisement I saw on television about a ball game, and it was a little girls' game, and this one little girl, she she made the last goal, but they lost. One of the little girls on the other side couldn't understand her being so happy and joyous with it. She goes up to the coach and she said, "But they lost." He said, "Not really.
Yeah.
They didn't really lose what she was looking at."
Yeah. That's exactly right. Okay. Any questions or comments about chapter 9 before we head on? We finished a chapter in record time, didn't we, Chris? Oh. All right, going on in chapter 10, he says, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. So he's calling them brethren. Uh, there are fellow Christians, and he wants this to be established in his communication. He does not want them to be ignorant, unknowing. He wants to uh, make sure that they understand exactly what's involved. Now, when he refers to the fathers, who is he referring to? Who are the fathers that he's talking about? He's talking about his Jewish background, his heritage. Now, you want to remember this is a mixed group. There are some Jews, but it's largely made up of Gentiles. They're not unaware of the law. They're not unaware of God's dealing with the Jew. And so he is able to use the Jewish experience, uh, the Christian life, and those that are Gentiles, being Christians, are built on what went on before. They're the beneficiaries of what God did through the patriarchal period and then the Jews as well. And so they in a sense share a common heritage in that way. All Christians do. Right. We are exactly. And Paul makes that point very definitely in the book of Galatians. We are of Isaac's descent, the son of promise. And The Jews had become the descendants of Hagar because of a physical relationship, not a spiritual relationship.
On the first page of our bulletin that went through the punishment with Pharaoh, but yet lived faithful.
Okay, he's going to have a lot to say about these people, exactly. But all of them came out of Egypt and were freed from bondage, weren't they? And they also were there going through the Red Sea. You have water walls on the side, you have a cloud over them, and so in that sense they're overwhelmed. In a sense, they're buried under the water and that cloud. And it says they were then baptized unto Moses. Notice it was not into Moses.
Yeah.
We were baptized into Christ. The Jews were baptized unto Moses. What does that mean?
Later.
It's talking about the relationship that they achieved, and Moses was their mediator. He was their lawgiver, and so he had a very special relationship to them. And in that sense, Paul is saying they were baptized unto Moses and this relationship. Then he goes on, he says they did all, pardon me. You have to speak up, Miss Gina. I can't hear. Oh, does it? Well,
New King James does too.
the New King James does as well. Well, I'm going to stick with unto because I think that's basically what the meaning is here. And there was no way they were baptized into Moses like we're baptized into Christ, because Moses didn't die for them.
It was for something that was to come later.
Right.
I think that's why it used the word unto.
Unto, right.
One version said unto salvation. I can't remember which.
Yeah. He goes on and he's talking about them. He said they did all of them eat of the spiritual food. Now, what spiritual food did they eat of? Was it spiritual in the sense that it was not material? It was spiritual in that it had a godly source. It was not something that was produced in a normal earthly way. The manna is what is being referred to. It fell like the dew. And when it was appeared on the ground in the morning, it was like little seeds, coriander seeds everywhere. They could gather it up. And they could do different things with it. They could mill it and make a flour and then make cakes out of it. And it said it tasted like it was made with honey. And it would make a wafer. They could eat it boiled like we would eat maybe oatmeal. So there was different uses of it. And it was spiritual in the sense. In fact, it's referred to in one place as angel food. The source was from God in a supernatural way. And they all ate of it. They also had a spiritual source for drink, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Jesus Christ. So here we have the confirmation that Christ is the one with them, talking with them, leading them, and this sort of thing. Had you thought about the journey that the children of Israel made for those 40 years, the area that they were going through? We know the two times that water was produced miraculously from a rock or a cleft in the rock. One time Moses was told to strike the rock. Then the second time he was told to speak to the rock, and he smote it instead, and that was the occasion which caused him not to be able to go into the land of Canaan. But that's not the only two times that God provided the water for them. They're going through a desert area. They were guided every day with a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. It was only through his care that they were able to reach and get to places where they could have water.
Sure was alone.
And so they drank of this special water that was provided for them every day, not just those two times. And that's what he's referencing them to know here. He says, but with many of them, God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Okay, all of them came out of Egypt. All of them are eating this food, the spiritual food, and they're drinking the water, but they all didn't make it, did they? They were not all pleasing to God. Now, remember what he's trying to accomplish and who he's trying to work with. He's talking to Christians, the Corinthians Christians. All of them have become Christians. They all are sharing blessings in Christ. But that doesn't mean they're all going to be pleasing. It's going to depend on their life. And are they being the self control ones that he just talked about in the last chapter? And now he's going to mention 4 different occasions using specific examples from the Jewish history of how many of them did not make it even through the wilderness wandering. Not all of them, in fact, none of the adult population made it into the land of Canaan. And so it's a serious thing that he's talking about. You know, being right with God is going to be a continual, everyday situation in submission to him and his will. Okay, he says, now these things were our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. This is Exodus chapter 32, and specifically verse 6 is quoted here. Now, that occasion he's referencing is when the children of Israel were at the base of the Mount Sinai, when Moses is up, been gone for 40 days, and they're ready to say, we don't know what's happened to him. He's probably dead. And they go to Aaron and say, you make us an idol. And so he collects the gold earrings and the jewelry, and then he molds a golden calf for them. That was an idol that they were all familiar with in the land of Egypt. And so they then said, this represents Jehovah. This represents the God who brought us out of Egypt. What's the problem with that? They were not to have any idols. No idol could represent God. He could not be contained in any idol. To worship an idol was to actually desecrate the name of God. And on this occasion, not only did they worship the calf, but then they also participated in some of the activities that were common back over in Egypt associated with the worship of the idol. That wasn't just dancing around. They were committing fornication and doing lascivious things, all in the name of worshiping that calf. It was a horrible situation. And we have then them suffering the consequences. Many of them died on that occasion. You remember the Levites were the ones who joined Moses in disciplining them. And that's when God chose the Levites as his special tribe that would serve him and then later serve the tabernacle worship. And it's interesting to note that when Aaron is describing to Moses what happened, he told him that he threw the gold in and the calf just came out. He didn't accept responsibility. We also find out, had it not been for Moses and his prayers, that Aaron would have probably not lived at that point for what he did. God was very displeased with Aaron on that occasion. Okay, then he goes on in verse 8, neither let us commit fornication as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. Now, this reference is found in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. And the occasion for this, you remember that as the children of Israel were coming up and heading toward the Jordan River, this is after the wandering period, and they were about ready to cross over into the land of Canaan. They had to come between where the Ammonites lived and where the Moabites lived, and the Moabite king Balak sent for Balaam, who was recognized as a prophet, someone special, to come and to curse the children of Israel. And you remember Balaam told him that God told him not to go, first of all. And he kept, when a second group came, he went back and inquired of God, can I go? Or, this sort of thing. They'd offered him a great deal of wealth. And Balaam had a greedy side to him. He wanted that wealth. And this time God told him to go, but you say only what I tell you to say. And so Balaam makes that known to the Moabites. And they said, okay, come on. And instead of cursing them, he blessed them. Every time he would go and at different places, they'd take him different places so he could see different portions of the children of Israel, and thinking that maybe God would change. God doesn't change. But we find out that in this chapter in Numbers, that Balaam gave advice to Balak. You know what it was? You be friendly to them. You get them to marry your daughters, and your daughters marry them, and it will bring about their downfall. And he was smart, because he knew exactly why God had told them not to intermarry with these foreign people, because if they did, they would take up their idolatry, and that's exactly what happened. And so in this section in Numbers is when you had this one, and I can't remember the tribe that he was a member of, but he actually very blatantly flaunted by taking one of the Moabite women into his tent there to commit fornication. And it was Phinehas, who was the son of Aaron, who went in with a spear and killed both of them on that spot. But they were not the only one participating. 23, they say it was between 23 and 24,000. I think one of the Old Testament records said 24, and here Paul is saying 23, and it's somewhere between. It's a large number. But they died because they listened to what Balaam had advised. And of course, later on, we know that they fight a battle, and Balaam is among those that are killed when the Israelites are successful against these people. Then he goes on in verse 9, let neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of the serpents. This comes from Numbers 21, verse 6. And the occasion here is when the children of Israel became so upset, they wandered around for so many years, and they say we loathe this manna. In other words, we hate it. That's all we have to eat. You promised us a land flowing with milk and honey, and all we can remember now is all the vegetables we had back in Egypt. They were ready to stone Moses on this occasion. And that's when God sent the fiery serpents among them and began biting them, and people who were bit succumbed. But many of them died because of the poisonous snakes that were there. And of course, you remember Moses prayed again on their behalf, and God said, okay, you make a bronze snake, lift it up on a pole, and if they will look at that bronze serpent after they're bit, then they will be healed. They still had to go through the pain of being bit. Just recompense. Yes, sir.
Didn't the problem with Balaam and Balak follow the children of Israel to Pergamus?
What now? What now?
Didn't the problem with Balak and Balaam at that time, their beliefs follow some of the children of Israel in the church of Pergamus in Revelation?
Yes, he is mentioned, and basically that is the idea of rationalizing and doing things for Christ to get monetary gain. That's basically what he's criticizing there in the book of Revelation. Someone who is willing to compromise, and their faith is not strong enough, and what they do in the name of religion, they do to have physical gain. And Paul even confronted some of that here in the Corinthian church. There were some that were doing what they were doing to make money out of their Christian life, and so that was what they were talking about. Okay, the last example that he uses is verse 10. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now, this goes to Numbers 14, verse 37. And this is when the children of Israel believed the unfaithful spies. You remember they are coming up. This is not long after they come out of the land of Egypt. The easiest and uh, the fastest route for them to have entered the land of Canaan would have been from the south. Just go right straight up. And they came to the southern border of Canaan. They stopped there, and then the children of Israel asked Moses to send the spies, and so he sends in one representative from the 12 tribes. You remember Caleb was there from the tribe of Judah. Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. They go with the other 10 spies. They spy out the land. When they come back, they say it is truly a land flowing with milk and honey. We saw produce that you wouldn't believe. They brought back an example of a cluster of grapes, and it was so heavy they carried it on a pole. Two men carried it on a pole, and then they said just one problem: they got fortified cities, and there are giants there, and we look like grasshoppers. There's no way. There's no way. They'd forgotten about God defeating the Egyptians. Can you believe that? They saw the Egyptian army drowned in the Red Sea. God was with them. He had guided them. He was taking care of them, providing them food. And yet now he can't help them take the land of Canaan.
Is this the same ones, or is this the children of the ones that came out of Egypt?
Okay, this is the original group that came out. These are the adults because this is the point at which God says, okay, they began to say, you just brought us out here and we're all going to die. Our children are going to die in the wilderness and this sort of thing. That was the common complaint. Yes, sir. It was a very short time. Don't know. I don't remember exactly the number of days, but
40 days, less than weeks.
yes, right. You're exactly right. And the common thing: were there no graves in Egypt? We're all going to just die out here in the desert. And this is when God says, "Okay, what you just said is going to happen. All of this generation, 20 years old and older, you are going to die in the wilderness."
They must not have believed that, that God meant what he told them.
Well, they just generally had a lack of faith, and that's what the writer of Hebrews. That was the criticism that he kept saying, and he said, "Don't be like them. Don't have this heart of unbelief." Uh, I think we find it hard to understand that, but at the same time, aren't we almost as guilty?
Yes.
No, in a lot of instances.
You think about all that we have that they didn't have. Yes, they saw the parting of the Red Sea, but we know about it. We have the record of it. We have our faith based on everything that happened to them. And yet, how many people today choose to ignore that? The vast majority of people today do.
We see in people today that that are prosperous, accomplished a lot in life that leaves God out of it. And I think a lot of people has the attitude that I've done very well. God's blessed me, and I've accomplished a lot. But in his beliefs, he ain't as dedicated as.
Have any of y'all seen the movie Shenandoah? You remember Jimmy Stewart was the father, and you remember the prayer he offered at the dinner table? We plowed the field, we planted this, we reaped the harvest, and this sort of thing. And basically, he wasn't thanking God for the food. He was saying, we produced it, and it was all our doing. And that's the attitude. That's the attitude that a lot of people have. Uh, but anyway, these people suffered the consequences of this, the horrible attitude that they had. And of course, God condemned them to the 40 years then, and it was a total of 40 years that they ended up wandering through this wilderness. God was still with them, wasn't he? He still produced the food for them. And another way that it was described, he bore them on eagle's wings. Their clothes didn't wear out and their shoes didn't wear out. 40 years worth of wear. That's an amazing thing, isn't it, to think about? And yet that happened to them. Now he goes on in verse 11, he says, now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So you have the purpose then given here, isn't it? For the recording that we have of all we have in our Bible. They're all to be examples to us. They are to be admonitions to us not to be like these people. And then he says, upon whom the ends of the world are come.
Does everybody do that today?
They don't even read the Old Testament, much less use it as an example. So many people avoid the Old Testament altogether. If they read anything at all, they might read Psalms, and they'll stick basically to the New Testament. What is he talking about? On whom the ends of the world are come. What period of time is he talking about? The last dispensation. These are the latter days, the latter times, as it's referred to in many instances. They are at the beginning. We're somewhere in that same dispensation. But it will be at the end of this dispensation that the end of the world will come. There's not going to be, God will make no more effort by way of doing anything for mankind. No, not even a 1,000 years. Christ is not coming back to this earth to set up a kingdom. It already is in existence. He is now reigning as King of Kings and Lord of Lords at the right hand of God. And so that's what he's saying here. This is the end dispensation. He says, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Okay, here's the statement. He's talked about the children of Israel. All of them enjoyed the blessings of God. The food, the water, the guidance, clothes not wearing out, and sort of this sort of thing. But that did not mean they were pleasing to God. And many of them suffered the consequences immediately, being put to death. And so he's trying to get them to say, just because you call yourself a Christian, and yes, you are enjoying blessings, that's no guarantee that you're going to be pleasing to God. It takes faithful obedience in being that Christian. It's not just a name that you wear, it's a life that you live. And that's what he's trying to get them to see. And then he goes on, he says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Do you think any of these Corinthian Christians may have been complaining about some of the things they were having to undergo? It would almost sound like it. You remember he's responding to questions that they've asked, comments that they've made. It would certainly appear that this is the type of thing. Chris mentioned a while ago people saying, why did God allow that to happen? Why am I suffering this sort of thing? I would think that they're going through some of the same situations.
They were human, wasn't
Pardon?
they? They were human, wasn't it?
That's right. They were human, and we complain as humans, don't we? And we fail to look for the blessings. We fail to look for the positive in life, and that's what God would have us to do. And so he is just putting it out there. None of the temptations or trials that you're going through is anything that's uncommon to mankind. God's not putting on you anything that is not a part of this human existence. And he also then goes on to say that when you're tempted, realize that God is not going to do it above what you can stand, and he's going to offer you the assistance to escape. What happens to that sometimes? We don't take the escape, do we? When we give in to sin and temptation, we are saying no to what God is offering. And so that's that. We need to certainly think about as we live our lives every day. And I don't know about you, but I give in to sin way too often. And we all need to work harder at uh, being temperate, self-control, and not allowing our thoughts, our tongue, run away with ourselves and the acts that we involve ourselves in that we should not. Uh, we need to stand firm. He says now he's going to get back to specifically what they're dealing with. He says, "Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee idolatry." Um, this was the major problem that the Gentile Christians had to deal with. Uh, they're coming from a background of idolatry that was it was everywhere. Remember Paul's description of the city of Athens, how that there were just temples and altars everywhere to every imaginable idea of an idol, not just one. Of course, they had their big temple to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Uh, the Corinthians were no different. Everywhere you look, there were idols, there were temples, there were altars, and so this was very much a part of their everyday life. It was not like they could just close their eyes. And so he's saying, flee idolatry. Don't don't do anything that's going to put you in close association with what you've come away from. From what he's going to say here in the next few verses, it almost appears that some of them were kind of like the Israelites who wanted to hold on to idolatry and God with the other hand. They didn't claim to, when they were worshiping the calf, in their mind, they were saying they were worshiping Jehovah. They wanted to hold on to both. They wanted the benefit of the idol and of Jehovah God. Later on, now they're going to adopt all sorts of idolatry, not just the calf worship. Uh, you know, it was Jeroboam the first that set up the calf worship, reinstated it for the 10 tribes that separated from Judah and Benjamin. And he set up two places, Dan and Bethel, with temples to worship the calf. He reinstituted what historically they were well aware of. But it was not long before they had added the idols that the Moabites worship, the idols the Ammonites worship, Baal that Jezebel brought in, Molech. They offered their infants as burnt offerings to him, and so they became overwhelmed with idols as well. And so this is what he's getting them to understand. Flee from that. That was the second bell. So Mark verse 14 there. We'll begin there next Lord's Day, Lord willing.